Interterra New Media presents Disrupting Taxes, applying technology and science to the tax system, reigniting the American dream, and exploring the forgotten stories of taxes, gold, and money. Written by Thomas J. Cryan, read by the author. Also included are original audio commentary clips, historical audio clips from various sources, and AI-generated voices of quotes from history, as well as natural sounds and sound effects. Dedication. For everyone born into the emerging generations. Opening quote: "If you don't innovate fast, disrupt your industry, disrupt yourself, you'll be left behind." John T. Chambers. Introduction. Principles needed to keep the faith.
In 196 BCE, Ptolemy V prepared for his coronation to become king of ancient Egypt. You can imagine it was a grand affair, with courtesans, entourages, high priests, and time-honored rituals. Despite the ornate splendor, the young king likely had trouble on his mind, however, for Egypt labored in the throes of many problems. From outside the kingdom, enemies attacked at the edges of the territory, sensing weakness. Within the kingdom, violent revolts, then decades-long, roiled the population. Seized lands lay dormant, and prisons were filled with tax debtors. The young ruler appeared in danger of losing the kingdom before the diadem crown settled on his head. It's worth noting that peaceful transitions of power were not the norm in ancient Egypt. Ptolemy V's father and mother had been killed under mysterious circumstances, and the child ruler had watched as his first guardians were dragged through the streets and executed under suspicion of the murders, so the stakes were high for the young king. Centuries later, in 1799, a French army engineer and officer named Pierre-François Bouchard was under pressure to rebuild Fort Julien, an old Mamluk fortification near the port city of Rosetta in Egypt. The French were defending the edges of their empire from the Ottomans and the British, and Rosetta was where they hoped to stop the advance. Ultimately, the fighting did not go well for the French in Egypt. But while rebuilding the fortifications, Bouchard did make a remarkable discovery: the remains of an ancient carved stone that included 3 versions of a decree written in 3 different languages. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt had inspired a burst of Egyptomania in France and Europe, and a corps of technical experts, known as the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, accompanied the French Expeditionary Army to Egypt. Bouchard was one of these experts. Upon spotting the stone, Bouchard recognized at once that he had just stumbled onto something of great value buried in the walls of this ancient fortress. Indeed, Bouchard had just discovered the Rosetta Stone, which would become the key to deciphering hieroglyphics for the first time and unlocking countless mysteries of the ancient Egyptians. But in that moment, Bouchard first had to marshal the efforts needed to survive the onslaught of the approaching Ottomans and British. Ptolemy V sensed he needed to win internal political support to preserve his tenuous position as the new ruler of Egypt. He was directly descended from Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's 4 beloved generals. Alexander had conquered much of the known world, from Greece to India. When he died unexpectedly, and somewhat suspiciously, at the age of 32, his vast empire was divided into 4 regional kingdoms, each ruled by one of his generals, with the territory of Egypt given to Ptolemy I. By the time Ptolemy V took the throne, things looked shaky indeed. In the generations since Ptolemy I, a government of oppressive taxes and corruption had emerged and established itself. With each new ruler, a new regime of taxes was levied upon the people until a mantle of oppression hung heavily upon the lower classes. These taxes were driven by the greed of the powerful. There was a harvest tax, a yoke tax on animals, a salt tax, a poll tax on all individuals in the family, a compulsory labor tax, either pay it or work as a laborer on the projects of the king, a mining tax, a wool tax, a beer tax, a sales tax, a temple tax, a burial tax, and on and on. This reality pushed the suffocating lower class to the edge of revolt. As one of his first official acts, the young ruler turned to a time-honored trick for securing support that has been used through the ages by kings and politicians alike: offer tax cuts, notably to the special interests. To their credit, or perhaps their folly, the French placed immense value on their archaeological plunder, even as they waged war. The Rosetta Stone was whisked away to Cairo, where Napoleon himself visited the remarkable discovery. Shortly thereafter, the stone was carted along behind the fighting French forces as they charged north to meet the British on the battlefield. Hoping to stave off defeat, they retreated to Alexandria and took their treasures with them. When the besieged French finally began to negotiate their surrender, their archaeological treasures turned out to be quite a sticking point. Although they were militarily defeated, vastly outnumbered, completely surrounded, and growing more desperate by the day, they refused to hand over their Egyptian discoveries. To their credit, the British agreed to negotiate rather than allow the French to destroy their entire hoard, as they had threatened. An agreement was finally reached. Some treasures, including the Rosetta Stone, would be transferred to British hands, while many other artifacts were allowed to remain with France. The remarkable stone embarked for London in 1801 and inspired incredible excitement among historians, archaeologists, linguists, and the public. Images of the text were shared far and wide, and there began to be breakthroughs as scholars across Europe worked on the 3 translations. The ancient Greek version of the text was quickly published by 1803. It took nearly 2 decades, however, to complete the transliteration of the 2 Egyptian scripts, but they were finally presented and announced in Paris in 1822. After all the suspense, all the years of laboring, all the incredible collaboration, the ancient secrets of the Rosetta Stone were finally unveiled for the world to see. It was a tax document. In ancient Egypt, to remain in power, Ptolemy V had to appease both the citizens and the powerful priestly class who enjoyed devout obedience from the people. Squeezed by the circumstances, Ptolemy V entered a bargain very similar to the political deals we see to this day. To ensure that the priests would declare religious support for his reign and in turn instruct the people to follow his rule, Ptolemy V announced sweeping tax cuts. As is often the case, the vast majority of these financial benefits went to the most powerful people in society, while only a small portion of the tax benefits was delivered to the lower classes. In this case, it was the priests and their temples that were provided the most significant exemptions from taxes. Having reached an agreement with the new king, the priests were truly excited by their special tax exemption. What is more, The priests wanted to ensure that everyone throughout the country knew that the king had granted them this special status. As a coronation gift, the priests had a detailed decree carved into a beautiful granodiorite stone. The priests etched into stone the message that the deities proclaimed the absolute establishment of a divine cult for Ptolemy V as the new ruler to promote and ensure the people's obedience to the new king. The priests went on to inscribe the details of the tax exemptions they had been granted. These proclamations were carved on the stone in 3 languages to make sure there was no mistaking the decrees, primarily the special tax advantages. It was first written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, the language of the priests, then Egyptian Demotic script, the language of the people, and last Ancient Greek, the language of the administrators. To guarantee wide exposure to this message, many carved copies of this stone were made, inscribed, and distributed to temples throughout Egypt, ensuring that everyone knew of this special status. The word tax, originally derived from both the Greek telonis, meaning to pay the toll house at the end, and the Latin taxare, meaning to access or levy, describes a payment and collection system charged and infused with notions of political power and influence. Ask yourself who is taxed and who is not, and this will show just what the government prioritizes and who has great influence. Investigate what is taxed, what is not, and how it is taxed and collected. And this reveals both what is mechanically possible at one level and who exerts political manipulation on another level. And most interestingly, ask who is exempt from tax, and you will see who possesses the pinnacle of political power. Since the days when families, extended families, clans, and tribes first started to live together in villages several thousand years ago, an agreed-upon social contract emerged as the foundation for the community. In these early towns called metropolis by the Greeks,
meter
for mother,
and polis for city,
mother city, the people agreed to give up some of their natural rights in exchange for services. The terms of the social contract centered on individuals relinquishing part of their inalienable rights in return for certain benefits. For example, the people of the village sharing their food, the community honoring the rule of law, and the government providing common protection. In exchange, the individuals were required to share some of their money and wealth as a tax to pay for these social rules, public services, and protection. These were the first coordinated acts of a community of people, and as these understandings evolved in ancient Greece, they started to be called democracy,
demos
for the common people,
and kratos
for force or might to rule, the power vested in the people. The Greeks further extended these notions with the infusion of philosophy into governance. A great example is the Stoics, who believed a governed society must be vested in courage, wisdom, moderation, and justice. And so it evolved that democracy recognized these principles collectively, a reflection of the people keeping the faith. Both sides honored the agreement. The people would give some money as a fair tax, and in return, the government would run effectively, enforce contracts, provide an efficient currency, stamp out corruption, protect property rights, and establish equal justice under the law. But then, as society started to grow, government struggled with how best to tax the people and how much to tax the people. There is little evidence that any mathematical or scientific studies were conducted to determine the most efficient and equitable tax system to implement in these early societies. Instead, tax systems defaulted to what could be mechanically collected. Unfortunately, these shortcomings continue today. This government confusion regarding how much to tax and how to systemically collect taxes can be seen everywhere in history, evidenced by the vast differences in taxation in societies. In the book of Genesis chapter 41, called for a tax of 20% of all crops to go to the pharaoh. In ancient Greece, the city-states had a variety of taxes, including taxes on consumption, property tax, and many tariffs or taxes in the marketplace. As we have seen, ancient Egypt had far too many taxes. In the Roman Empire, there was a great variety of taxes and no efficient system to collect them. In fact, Rome, frustrated by the lack of an effective mechanism to collect taxes, decided to subcontract the task of tax collection to wealthy citizens, allowing them to pay the taxes out of their own pockets for an entire region, and then go out among the people and brutally collect the tax, plus a handsome commission for themselves. This, of course, led to further abuse and corruption. At one point, Julius Caesar became so dissatisfied with the tax system, he tried a simple, straightforward tax of 1% on all sales. It was truly brilliant for its time, but Caesar could not maintain a mechanism for collection, nor hold back the surge of political influence and corruption. So taxes rose continuously, with special exemptions for the influential. Since the beginning of civilization, the politically powerful have realized they can wield their influence and manipulate the tax system to their benefit, often by creating complex and confusing regulations, reducing their own taxes, and shifting that tax burden onto the backs of the masses, the less powerful and the less educated. Ultimately, ongoing abusive acts by the politically strong will reduce the ability of the people to keep the faith in their government. For over 3,000 years, very few, if any, truly dynamic, equitable, and fair tax structures have ever been created. One interesting tax experiment started just about 230 years ago as the people of the U.S. ratified their Constitution and established a democratic government that could evolve and institute a fair tax system. The story of the U.S. founders centers on their request to the people to keep the faith that the government will create a tax system and a legal system that will evolve and be fair and equitable to everyone. And so here, in this place, we will start our journey, unearthing the forgotten story of how the U.S. tax system came to be, with its current rules, protocols, and procedures. We will explore just how the inchoate U.S. tax system has come up short. Then, we will examine a new, simple, mathematically and scientifically sound tax system that can be implemented for the first time in history due to advances in banking hardware and software and comprehensive digital processing, where the mechanism of the collection system, based on these modern technologies, ensures fairness. A new tax system that will create real equity, narrow the wealth gap, and reignite the American dream. A system that just maybe will make it possible to once again institute the principles that allow for the people to keep the faith. To this day, the Rosetta Stone is the most viewed exhibit at the British Museum in London. Let's begin our journey.